So welcome everybody. Today is lesson 9. And if I can be totally honest with you, this is one of yes, the bugs and the mud, you're good. The allergies for people, some people as well. I would say that of everything in our course, if we just go and have a quick. Danny, yeah, I could imagine it would be. Good question. So if we look at kind of all our topics, if I'm going to be completely honest, I would say 2 lessons are the most important content lessons in this course. One of them was probably lesson 3, where we learned to fetch data from our database. And today, which will bleed into and kind of break today's lesson over, break this lesson over too, we're going to start dealing with authentication, which is a super critical topic. Obviously, the applications we build, not only do they have to work, but they have to be secure. So we're going to start looking today at some of the basic steps and best practices that we need to implement when we're building web applications. But before we do that, before we jump in today, I want to go over assignment 2. So assignment 2 is now posted on Blackboard in the assignments tab. I sort of hemmed and hawed. Normally, I like to break this up into 2 or even 3 different parts. And I've kind of made changes to it a few times. My preference would be to have you do it in pieces, but the problem is we just don't really have time. And the only way I could do that would be for you to have the first part of it due next week, which isn't a lot of time. So I've just decided to keep it as one large assignment and to give you 3 weeks to do it. Okay, so the assignment is going to be due on Tuesday, April the 13th. So you've got 3 weeks, and you actually have, there's 2 options. There's 2 choices in the assignment. I'm going to go over both options, and I will happily explain why I'm providing some choice. So there's 2 different assignment documents, option A and option B. Option A is easier. Okay, so it's not quite as demanding, but the limitation with option A is the maximum grade is 80% because the assignment it involves less. Okay, so if you do option A and you get full marks, you're going to get an 80 on the assignment. You can't get any more than that. Although I guess there are a couple bonus marks that could bump your grade a little bit. So my suggestion to you, and I mean, our attendance is a little bit, I appreciate everyone who's here today. We're about half full. I imagine a few other people are going to come. If you're watching today's lesson on video, also want to note that which option you should pick probably depends on your comfort level with PHP. If you're really struggling in the course, you're finding this course really challenging, then I'm going to recommend you choose option A and max out your grade at 80%. So you're going to have to perform, create, read, update, and delete operations on your database, validate user input, implement security, use shared elements, upload files, and handle errors. So we've already covered in our lessons everything you need for assignment 2, with the exception of file uploads, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks. So for this option, you're basically going to take your assignment 1 submission and you're going to extend it. Okay, so you're going to add additional functionality on to assignment 1. So if you're choosing this option, when you go to submit, you need to submit 2 things. You need to submit a link to your private GitHub repository, and you can use the same repository for assignment 1. You don't have to create a new one. If you want to create a new one, you can, but you don't have to. Your repository should have a minimum of 4 commits on at least 2 different dates. And you should be using the git commands so that you get these descriptive names. You're not just going to drag and drop your files, because then GitHub just says, every commit just says add files by upload. And you're going to submit a link to your live website on AWS. So again, these will probably be the same 2 links you gave me for assignment 1. You're also going to create a README file in your GitHub repository that explains what the application is and also includes the link to the live site. You must do all, not some of your own work, all of your own work. Okay? If you do not give me an independent assignment, I cannot give you a grade other than a 0. You're free to look at the code I've posted to GitHub from class, but it's for reference only. It's not to be downloaded, changed, and uploaded back as your own work. And your submissions are subject to a review, so we may have a meeting where I ask you to explain any of the work you've submitted. And you can't make any changes to your repository or site after the due date. If you do more work afterwards, we will have an issue. So what things do you have to do if you remember assignment 1, there were 3 pages, right? You had a form, you had a save page, and then you had a page that showed all your data in an HTML table. So here are the things you'll have to add on to it. You'll have to create a home page that describes the site and how you put it together. So kind of like we've done with our PHP gaming site. You'll have to create a shared header that's included on all the pages and includes a navigation bar. So again, much like we did in class last week. On the page that has your HTML table, you're going to add a link for creating a new record, as well as adding edit and delete links. And when a user clicks delete, much like our coding class, users should get a confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete this? You're then going to implement the ability for users to edit and delete records. You'll add error handling. So again, the same things we did last week, 404 handling, try catch blocks whenever you're interacting with the database, and a general error page. So if an error happens, users should get taken to the error page like we made last week. You're then going to build functional registration, login, and logout pages. We're going to do that in class this week and into next week. You're also going to change the header. So when a user is anonymous, they haven't logged in, the header will show links to register and log in. As soon as somebody logs into the site, register and log in, they disappear, and their username and log out will become visible in the nav bar. Again, we'll work on this in class over the next week or 2. You're then going to secure your create, edit, and delete, the links and the pages. So when a user is not logged in, they can see the data, but they have no ability to add, edit, or delete the data. And then when users are adding or editing, they'll also have the ability to upload, attach an image to that record. You're going to implement some CSS. You can do your own. You can use Bootstrap. You can use other CSS that you find online. That's fine. But if you use someone else's CSS, you have to make a note in the README file and in your header where that style sheet came from, if it's not your own. And you can't just replicate the exact Bootstrap styles of our PHP gaming site. You've got to make the site look like your own in order to get full marks for that part. And then the deployment to GitHub, making sure I'm invited and that it's private, that you have a README file, and that you've deployed your pages to AWS. You're not submitting me a local host version. It's not enough to build a website. You actually have to be able to get it to run up on the internet. Okay, so the assignment is out of 32. In total, there are 2 possible bonus marks for extra PHP functionality you add. But again, your mark gets scaled down to 80%. So if you get 32 out of 32, your rubric will say 32 out of 32, but your mark will get scaled down to 80% of that. Are there any questions about this version of the assignment? All right, well, I'm going to move on to option B. And if questions come up about option A, then by all means, feel free to ask. So for option B, you're going to build a content management system. And I think we may have looked briefly at what a content management system is before. So again, it counts for 30%. In this case, this is a more advanced assignment, so it's worth up to a full 100%. Same due date, same submission requirements. So I'm not going to go over all this stuff again. It's identical in the two versions. So the idea of a content management site is a website builder, something like Wix or WordPress. And most sites these days use content management systems, and that is so that people can update the content without having to use FTP or modify HTML source code. Okay, so I've created my own mini version of a sample of a content management site, and there's a YouTube link in here where I do a little 5-minute walkthrough. So you're free to watch that on your own time, but I will show you a sample from a student who's now in her second year that she built in this course last year. So with the content management site, there's really two parts to the site. There's a private, password protected admin site where a site administrator can manage the user accounts and also manage the web page records. And then there is the public site that our site visitors will see. So the first part is building the site control panel, where someone can register and then log into the site. There should be the ability to see all the users in the site, edit or delete users, and then the ability to add, edit, or delete pages in the database. Notice I've said web pages exist in the database. You're not creating new physical pages. These are virtual web pages. And everything in the site control panel has to be password protected. If someone accesses them, they have to be logged in to access any of these features. So we're going to learn how to do that starting today. There should be the ability to upload a site logo, which will appear at the top left of the site. So that's the admin panel. And the public website has a shared header. And all of the links in the header come from your database. And then you'll have one page called index.php where the content changes dynamically. So here's an example. So this is Rebecca's content management system. This is the public face of the website. And here's the admin portal. Oops. I think I already have an account. Okay, so you can see when I'm logged in, it shows my username and it shows me log out. I can see all the other user accounts. For example, I can delete one. So notice the pages. It's got home, about, there are 6 pages in the site. And on the public site, where I'm an anonymous user, I've got all 6 links in my nav bar. So when I click, for example, Monday events, it shows me the content in the database. If I want to add a new page, I can save this to the database. And now on the public site, you'll notice my navigation bar, all the links are fetched from the database. And when I click it, it shows me the page title and the content. So it's like a virtual page. I didn't create a file called richespage.php. I just created a new record in the database. If I go to back to my control panel and delete it, Notice now that page is gone. And this logo I can also replace. I'm not going to replace it, but I could browse, upload a picture, and it would replace the logo that shows in the header. So this is how a content management system works. Again, implementing your own CSS error handling. So also worth 32 marks, but different requirements for the evaluation. At least some of the requirements are different. So it's totally up to you which version you choose. If the idea of the CMS is overwhelming for you, then I suggest doing option A. If you're feeling pretty comfortable with PHP and you'd like the extra challenge, then do option B and build the content management system. But it is entirely up to you. Are there any questions from anybody about either option? Okay, so David, you mean more technical questions around authentication that we're going to talk about? Yeah, we'll cover that stuff today. Okay, well, let's quickly, as guidance, use the chat. Tell me, or you can even message me privately in the chat, on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you feeling so far with what we've done in this course overall? I mean, you learned HTML and CSS last semester. This semester, we've been kind of putting that together with PHP and MySQL to build a functioning web application. So what's your comfort level so far with the technology we're using? Just put a number from 1 to 10 in the chat. 1 meaning I'm totally lost, 10 meaning I'm feeling really good about the technology that we've done so far. So either message me privately or put in publicly. Okay. And there's no right or no wrong. I'm just trying to get a sense of some guidance as to which assignment option may be most appropriate. Okay, so I think this is really the question to ask yourself in figuring out which one you want to do. I'd say if you're at an 8 or higher, I would definitely recommend option B. Even if you're at a 7 or 8, I think then you're probably able to do the content management system, and you probably learn more from it. If you're much below 7, then like if you're a 6 or below, then probably tackling option A is a good approach. But if you're at a 7 or higher, then I think you can probably manage to do quite well on the content management system. And this assignment, when I get feedback from students, they often say, I learned an awful lot from building this. Like it was challenging, but I got a lot out of it. So that would be my suggestion. If you're a 7 or higher, then at least think seriously. But it is entirely up to you. If you've got a ton of other stuff on your plate and you want an assignment you can get a decent grade on, but you may not have the time for the full one, then you do what you think is best. Okay. The only thing I'm going to recommend, regardless of which version of the assignment you pick, is get started early. You have 3 weeks, so that gives you time to contact me, come to office hours, email me, and get help if you're stuck. This project is way too big to do in like 1 day. You're not going to start this on the 12th, and be done. So you do need to get started early in either case. All right. So I will throw the link in the chat as well. Let's dive into web application security. So the link is on Blackboard in lesson 9. We'll use our regular Miro whiteboard. So I've put the link in the chat. So follow the link here for a second. Oh yeah, sure, David, go ahead. That would probably be this one. Oh, no, it wasn't. That's supposed to be for this week. You're gonna get the same quiz again, which should make it pretty easy. Thank you for pointing that out. I will have to check the quiz. We'll cover sessions and cookies today. Yeah, Colton, just put your name right on the sticky note, I think. Okay, you know what? I will not include last week's quiz in the final grade, so don't worry about it. I will never punish you guys for my mistakes. So I'm sorry about that. If that ever happens, then let me know. Like if you see the quiz and think, I've been to class and I'm really sure we haven't talked about this, please let me know. So I don't want to stress you out. Okay, so it will not count. I'm going to reuse the same quiz for next week, so you've already seen the questions. And we will cover all the content today. So my sincere apologies for that. So after class, I'll need a bit of time just to fix that up. So add a sticky note and just tell me what is the first thing that comes to your head. What do you think about when you hear that term, web application security? And be sure to add a note if you're doing the class asynchronously through the recording. Participating here, it will actually I'm giving you grades just for participating in the activity. So you have until next Tuesday to post your sticky note. Tanya, it doesn't log for you. You mean you can't log in? It shouldn't even. Did you try the link in the chat? Because I'm pretty sure the board doesn't even require authentication. Okay, Tanya, why don't you just put your comment in the chat here and I will add the sticky for you and give you credit. So make sure you put your name in your sticky note. Okay, that's great, Colton. So SQL injection and yeah, a loss of personal data. Secure links. Okay, that's great, Ariel. Yeah, so Tanya, post here and I'll make the sticky on your behalf. Okay, David asks, who can see, who's got access to my data? Really interesting question. Okay, so if he said thinks about firewalls. Yep, so how is our information safeguarded within the network that stores it? Okay, thanks, Tanya. I will add that. Okay, you think about, yeah, security questions. Like I know, for example, yeah, many sites, like sites that are sensitive, for example, on my banking app and banking site, I've set it up that it asks me a security question every time I log in. Even in my, on my typical device that I use, I want that extra confirmation every time. So again, if you're watching, yep, I do it on CRA as well, absolutely. So if you're watching the video later, make sure you use the Miro board link and add your sticky note before next week's class. This is part of your in-class activity grade. Okay, so yeah, Ariel's saying secure payment methods. So using a site like PayPal rather than giving your credit card out to individual vendors. Really good point. Yeah, so security for our client data. Yeah, and authorities for different users. That's right, Felix. It's a really good point. Just zoom out, make sure I'm not missed anybody. So I'm seeing some really common so please make sure you throw a sticky on here. Maybe Mike, Preston, let us know your thoughts as well. And I will add a contribution grade for everybody participating today. Okay, so and Colton also mentioned, yeah, forgotten passwords and two-step authentication. I don't think we'll have time to implement two-factor authentication, but I'm glad you raised that, Colton. It's becoming more and more common, right? That not only do you enter a credential, but then you also have to reply with a code that comes to a mobile device to ensure that your credential has not been compromised or shared. So we'll come back and check this. Come back and check this later. All right, that's a really important point. Yeah, we've always got a balance. You know, we can make things secure, but there's also a balance. If applications are so secure and so incredibly inconvenient to access, people stop using them. So that's a really good point, David, right? So there is a balance between, you know, usability and accessibility that we're constantly trying to navigate. And we've got to, you know, create interfaces that portray both. You know, the site is usable, but it's also secure. And those things kind of change over time. Like two-factor may become just standard. So yeah, we've got permissions and privileges. So that's an important part of security model as well. Right? So there's really two levels to application security. We've got authentication, which is knowing who our user is. And we're really going to deal with authentication. And then we've also got, thanks, Preston, we've also got authorization. So what's the difference between authentication and authorization? This would be a really great job interview question for a junior developer. You could use the chat. They're related concepts, authentication and authorization, but how are they different? I'll just throw that question in the chat. Authentication versus authorization. What do those two things mean to you? Good guess, Tanya. Actually, no. That's the permission to get in. That's actually our authentication. It's identifying who this person is. That's the authentication piece. So what would the authorization piece be? It has something to do with Preston's comment on our whiteboard. That's exactly right, David. So authentication is about identity. Who are you? And then, so that's kind of the first level, is figuring out who this user is. Authorization is then the next level up. Now that we know who you are, what are you allowed to do in here? So for example, if we go to Blackboard, we see this all the time, right? We're looking at the same page here. We're both looking at the lesson 9 folder, but how is my lesson 9 folder, if you compare it to what's on your screen, how is it different? What are some of the differences you note if you look at lesson 9 on Blackboard versus what you can see on my screen? Yep, so I've got the ability to, I've got these little arrows which allow me to interact with these items. I have this edit mode. I've got a student preview, right? I can see elements that are hidden that you guys don't see, right? So all of these pieces, there's authorization checks going on around all of them, right? We're all looking at the same page, but there's server-side script, there's logic running around all of these pieces that determine whether to show or hide these elements, depending on whether we're logged in or not. So that's authorization. So I'm just going to, let's get our application started up. So I'm going to connect to the VPN. I'll start my XAMPP server. So let's get connected. We'll start up XAMPP. I'll open up PHP Storm. And actually, so here's our PHP gaming site. Right, so here's how we left off last week. We built our little nav bar, which is cool. We built the home page. But we have this totally public site. There's no authentication or authorization checking at all, right? Anybody can just come to the site, add, edit, delete, whatever they want. So over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to show you how we want to transform this. So here's the site from one of my other sections. So in this site, whoops, where are we? On this site, we're building like a grocery list. So here's how it looks now. This is kind of what we're going to do. So my grocery list, notice here it's read only. I don't see the ability to add, edit, or delete when I'm not logged in. If I log into the site, however, now the same page loads, but now I have the ability to add items, edit them, or delete them. So we're going to implement this same kind of functionality in our PHP gaming site. When we're logged in, we can add, edit, or delete, and it'll show, notice it'll show my username and log out. Once I log out, it says register and log in, and I'm back to a read-only view. So if you do option A for assignment 2, this is a big part of what your end product will look like. So an anonymous user can only read the data. They would have to register and log in order to be able to add, edit, and delete. So this is where we're going with our PHP gaming site. So let me just log back in. I'll stay here. So let's say, I'm logged out of the site right now, and we can tell that I'm not authenticated because I don't have the links. And over here, my navbar says register and log in. So what if I try and do this? What if I try to go directly to the item details page in this case? What should happen? So I'm not logged in, but I'm trying to access the page that would let me add a new record to the database. There's a few possibilities. The page could load, I could get an error, or what typically happens on a website when you try to load a page that you don't have access to. Well, let's see, right? So when I try to access it, right, it takes me to redirect. Most sites will do the same. Let me copy this URL from Blackboard. I'm over here in a private window, so I'm not signed in. So if I try and go there, right, Blackboard's going to ask me to sign in. So here's what that kind of workflow looks like. Here's my super awesome graphic design. I know it's been a while and you guys have really been missing this. So here's what happens, right? I tried to get to the item details page here, or I tried to get to a page in Blackboard. So what happens on this page? The server finds the URL, but before it returns the page, there's an authentication check. Do we know who this user is? If I'm authenticated, if I'm logged in, it will load the page. But if I'm not, I get redirected to the login page. I'm asked to enter a username and password, which I submit to the server. And one of two things happens. So I'll put in, oops. If my login is no good, it keeps me on the login page and gives me some kind of notice that those credentials are no good. Right? So I try my login. If it's incorrect, I show the error and I load the login page again. When I put in a valid login, however, before I get taken back to my original page, my identity has to be stored somehow. So for those of you who did the quiz that I mistakenly assigned to you last week, we have a couple of ways we could store who the user is before we let them leave. So the session was one option, and what was the other? What's the other way we could store a user identity? We could store them in a session, or the answer is actually in the lesson 9 folder. Yes, David, right? We can use a session or a cookie. So what we're going to do. It's important that we know the difference between sessions and cookies. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording for 5 minutes. Come back at 11:46. I want you to find out, how do sessions work? How do cookies work? What's the difference? We can use one or both. We're going to use sessions and we'll talk about why. So take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 11:46. I'm not going to put you in breakout groups. You can do your own research. In 5 minutes, let's have a little sharing session and I'll add the notes to Blackboard. Okay. So what can you learn about sessions and cookies in 5 minutes? Go. All right. There was our 5 minutes. It goes fast. And Michael, thank you for your note as well. Patching your software, absolutely. And encrypting your data. Yeah, and we'll talk about this. Some of these things today. So what'd you find out about sessions and cookies? I have redone the quiz. So the quiz is replicated for next week. It'll be open after last week's class, and last week's quiz will not count. So don't worry about the grade you got. But there are some questions in the quiz about sessions and cookies. So what can we say about them? Okay, so just make two kind of bulleted lists here. Stored Server side. Thanks, David. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks, Sonia. Okay. Session creates a file in a temp directory. Cookies are files stored direct on the client computer and used for tracking. Cookies can track the identity of the user, while sessions are hidden from clients. So that's an important point. Okay, so I've just tried to shorten that. Okay, so persists until deleted by the user or reaches a preset expiry. But many cookies don't expire. What about session expiry? Thanks, Nafisa. That's a really good point. So cookies, if there's a cookie on your machine, it's going to last until you either delete it, like clear your browser history, or that cookie might have a set expiry. But that set expiry can be, years. Ah. Okay, great points. Thank you, David. So cookies are less secure because clients can change them. They're just text files, although they're often they should be encrypted. But users could go in, they can delete them, they could modify them. Yeah, your browser might be hacked. Okay, so ends when browser closes. How else can a session end? Thanks, Defise. That's great. I'm going to add that. So cookies are commonly used for authentication. Your site preferences, for example, are stored in your... So if you log into a site and you set preferences, if you log into that site on a different device or different browser, those preferences, they don't typically translate because if they're stored in cookies. Your shopping cart items, yep. So I just want to come back to this for a second. So let's say you log into Blackboard today. You log in, you're in Blackboard, the end of class today, you just leave your browser open. Are you going to be logged into Blackboard forever if you never power off your machine and don't log out or close the browser? If you come back in 2 days, okay, so Colton, so how does that happen? So it ends when the browser closes, or why or when would you be logged out? Okay, or a user logs out, or yes, that's right, Colton, or default timeout is reached. And on most web servers, this is typically 20 to 30 minutes of inactivity. So if you load a site and you don't interact with it at all, you don't refresh the page or move or navigate anywhere in the site, most sites will time you out after 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, and this is an important thing to think about if we're going to store logins in the session. Now, typically the sessions are going to be more secure, right? For the reasons David outlined. Because on the client's computer, clients can change them. The sessions, we have no access, no way to interact with them other than close our browser or log out. So there's a little bit of a warning here, and I realize we're almost due for a break. I just want to talk about session cookies just for a minute longer. So I found this out the hard way. I'm going to show you a site. So most sites that I build, we don't use cookies, we use sessions. So this is a agency, a not-for-profit agency of the provincial government. It's a really old site. Some students who used to work for me built it years ago. And what happened was they were super annoyed with us when we built it, because when users started using the site, they started adding all this data, right? So they would go in and create a project record. They had to translate it and put in both official languages all of the data. You can see it's a really long form. And by default on this web server, the timeout was 20 minutes. So users were spending hours filling out this page, and then they'd come finally down to the bottom and they'd hit save, and their session, they would have been in here for 2 hours and their session timed out. So they got sent back to the login screen and all of the data they'd entered was lost. They were not happy with us. So what we actually did was we said, do you want us to increase the session timeout? And they said no, because we don't want someone logging into the site and then walking away and having them stay logged in for a really long time. So they said, put a countdown here with a little warning pop up when there's 1 minute left. And also give us save buttons in every section so we can post to the server as we go. And that way we hopefully won't reach that session timeout. So going back to our whole authentication model, why do we need a session or a cookie when somebody logs into a site? Why do we have to store their identity? Why can't we just check their credentials in the database and then let them go wherever they want to go in the site? Why do we need to use one or both of these? It has to do with the nature of the HTTP protocol that all web applications use. Just open up our PHP gaming site. So let's look at a page like our games page. So on our games page, we've got a variable here. We've got an SQL string, right? On line 14, we're setting this. What happens to this variable if we reload this page or we navigate to any other page in the site? Will the variable we've populated on one page, does it get transferred from page to page, or does it get destroyed? That's right, it's destroyed. HTTP, and I'm putting this in the chat, is a stateless protocol. So I'll add that here. We need to store user identities. Help if I could spell. And roles in either of these, since values do not persist from page to page. So when someone logs in, we know who they are, but as soon as they go somewhere else, if we don't store their identity in our session or cookie, their identity gets lost. So using a session or cookie is a way around this. It's like having a passport, basically, that you can travel around and it always says who you are. Without a passport, you can go into one place and they'll check who you are, but as soon as you leave that place, they don't know who you are anymore. So we're going to use sessions because they're more secure. Now, some websites, when you log in, they have a little checkbox that says, keep me logged in. So if you sign in today and you come back to this website in a week, you're still logged in. When you check that box, is it using a session or a cookie? Facebook used to do this. They don't do it anymore. When you've got a little remember me checkbox, would they store your identity in a cookie or a session? Right, it'll be a cookie because it persists until it's deleted. So you can close your browser, you can power off your device, come back, and your identity's still there. So it's more convenient. I think somebody mentioned this, right? Convenience versus, right, David, you mentioned it, the balance between security and accessibility. So I would never check a box that says keep me logged in. Too risky. But that's where they're giving you the option for convenience to store your ID in a cookie instead of in a session. Session's going to be more secure because it's not going to last as long. And if someone steals your device, you're probably not going to still be logged in. So you're going to get the same review questions about sessions and cookies. Now you can refer to these notes around them in order to do the quiz. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about sessions or cookies before we take a pause? Okay, it's 11:58. Let's take a 10-minute lunch, stretch, coffee, cigarette, fresh air, whatever you need, break. And when we come back, we'll start implementing this stuff in our PHP gaming site. Back shortly.
Hi, I'm